Hello, welcome back to Kim Reads as we continue with Changes for Samantha. Chapter 2, Searching for Nellie. Days and days went by, but Nellie never came. There was no note, no message, no word at all from her. Every afternoon, Samantha hurried home from school and sat waiting in the front parlor. She pretended to do her schoolwork, but really she was staring out the window, hoping to see Nellie coming toward her. But she only saw strangers. Her hopes faded as each bright afternoon faded into gray twilight. She read Nellie's letter over and over again, adding up the days in her head. One day for Nellie to pack, one day to travel, one day with their uncle. Samantha began to worry. Maybe something had happened. Maybe Nellie, who was sick with the flu again. Maybe Mrs. Van Sicklen wanted her to stay in Mount Bedford. Or maybe her uncle wouldn't let her come to visit. Something had to be wrong, because if Nellie was in New York, Samantha knew she would have kept her promise. The first few evenings, as soon as Uncle Guard came to the door, he asked about Nellie. Did she come today, Sam? But after a while, he didn't need to ask. He could tell the answer was no by the disappointed look on Samantha's face. One night after dinner, Uncle Guard said, "Tonight we'll telephone Mrs. Van Sicklen and find out where Nellie and her sisters are." "That's a good idea," said Aunt Cornelia. "Telephone?" asked Samantha. "It's all the way to Mount Bedford. That's a long distance." "Well, what else? Do we have a newfangled contraption like the telephone for?" asked Uncle Guard. Samantha and Cornelia followed Uncle Guard into the hallway and watched as he cranked the telephone. "Operator," he shouted into the mouthpiece. "Hello, operator. I would like to speak to the Van Sicklen residence in Mount Bedford, please." Samantha heard some loud crackling on the line. Then Uncle Guard shouted, "Mrs. Van Sicklen, please." "Mrs. Van Sicklen, Gardener Edwards here." No, nothing's wrong. Sorry to alarm you by telephoning. We're wondering where Nellie is. Nellie, your little maid, and her sisters, Bridget and Jenny." Uncle Guard paused. Then his voice got serious. 2 weeks ago? I see. Well, do you happen to know the uncle's exact address? No. I don't suppose he has a telephone. No, I thought not. Well, thank you, Mrs. Van Sicklen. I'll ring off now. He turned the crank, hung up the earpiece, and then looked at Samantha. "Mrs. Van Sicklen says the girl left Mount Bedford 2 weeks ago. She put them on the train herself. The uncle's name is Michael Malley. Mrs. Van Sicklen didn't know his exact address, but she thinks he lives somewhere near the river, on 17th or 18th Street. "They left Mount Bedford 2 weeks ago," repeated Samantha. "Why hasn't Nellie come to see me in all that time?" "Nellie may be working," Uncle Guard said, "or maybe she's too busy looking after Bridget and Jenny." Samantha felt desperate. "Can't we try them? If we could just find where Nellie's uncle lives." "Samantha," Aunt Cornelia interrupted gently, "New York is a big place. It could be very hard, probably impossible, to find Nellie's uncle by just wandering around. I'm afraid all we can do is wait for Nellie to come to us." "Don't give up, Sam," said Uncle Guard. "Nellie will come one of these days. I'm sure she will." He tried to turn his worried frown into a smile, but Samantha could tell by his voice that Uncle Guard wasn't really sure Nellie would come. Samantha was quiet for a moment. She was thinking hard. Then she said, "Thank you for telephoning, Uncle Guard." She climbed up the stairs to her room. With each step, she was more determined. She didn't care how hard it would be. She was going to find Nellie, and she would go the very next day. After school that afternoon, Samantha set off under the heavy gray sky. She was more than a little nervous. In just a few blocks, she would be in a part of the city she had never seen before. But she followed the signs carefully and found 17th Street without any trouble. A strong wind at her back seemed to push her right to it. But after she walked around the river for 5 or 6 blocks, 17th Street changed. Samantha had to jostle her way down the icy, muddy middle of the street because of the walks were blocked with push carts. The carts were piled high with potatoes, baskets, brooms, and buckets. The air was so full of the smell of fish and smoke it seemed as dense as fog. And there were so many people. Women dressed all in black with shawls over their heads poked at the things in their carts. Silent men stood next to small fires, rubbing their hands. Packs of raggedy-looking boys ran through the crowd. Samantha began to feel small and timid as a mouse in the hubbub around her. All the noise and strangeness was frightening, but she could not turn back. It's a good thing there were so many people out in the street, she said to herself bravely. Someone must know Nellie's uncle. But the cold was chilling, and the hands seemed to be freezing for her courage, too. When she saw the steam rising from a cart of roasted chestnuts, she decided to get some because they looked so nice and hot. Samantha handed the chestnut man a penny. As he gave her the bag full of nuts, he said, "There you are, missy. The chestnuts will cheer ye. Put them in your mouth to warm up your hands." His sing-song accent reminded Samantha of the way Nellie's father had talked. "Please, sir," she said, "do you know Mr. O'Malley?" The man grinned. "Sure, and there are many. Many O'Malleys, miss. Which one would you be wanting?" "Mr. Mike O'Malley," said Samantha. "He lives on 17th or 18th Street." The grin vanished from the man's face like a light blow on a cold wind. "And what would a young missy such as yourself be wanting with a hooligan like Mike O'Malley?" he asked. "My friend Nellie, his niece, lives with him," said Samantha. "Please, do you know where he lives?" The man thought for a moment. Then he said, "Last I heard, he was living, if you can call it that, over on 18th Street with the shoemaker." "Thank you," said Samantha. Mind you be careful," warned the chestnut man as Samantha hurried away. She walked fast, but she was worried. Was Nellie's uncle a bad man? The chestnut man had called him a hooligan. Samantha was not sure what a hooligan was, but she was quite sure that she did not want to meet one. Only the idea of finally seeing Nellie kept her going. By now, she was an expert at dodging people and carts. In no time, she rounded the corner and found the shoemaker's shops on 18th Street. There, outside the shop, she stopped. She stood silently staring at the building. "Is this where Nellie lives?" she wondered. The building was gloomy and horrible. It was falling apart and looked as if it was too tired to stand up anymore. Tattered laundry hung from the windows like grimy flags of defeat. Samantha did not want to go to the dark doorway, but then she thought, maybe Nellie has to go to this doorway every single day. Maybe Nellie is there right now. She climbed the steps and went inside. The door slammed behind her as if her building was swallowing her whole. The hallway smelled like rotting garbage. It was so dark Samantha could hardly see. She held her breath and stared up the creaky steps. Suddenly, at the top of the steps, a door flew open. A woman stuck her head out. "What do you want?" she asked in a hard voice. Samantha froze. I'm looking for Mr. Mike O'Malley," she croaked. "Hist!" frowned the woman. "You'll not find him here, I'm happy to say. Now go away." She started to close the door. "Please, ma'am, I was told he lived here. I've got to find him. He's got Nellie and—" "Nellie?" asked the woman. She stopped closing the door. A little face appeared at her knees, peeking around her skirt, smiling at Samantha. The woman scooped out the baby and opened the door a bit wider. "Is it Nellie you're looking for?" "Yes," said Samantha. The woman still didn't smile, but she said, "Come along then, quickly now." Samantha stepped inside. She stood awkwardly near the door in a small room. It was not much lighter than the hallway, but it was scrubbed clean. It was more crowded than any room Samantha had ever seen. It was everything at once. One part was the kitchen. There were beds and chairs pushed together to make beds in each corner. In the middle of the room, there was a wooden table where 6 children sat. They were making flowers out of paper. They were all looking shyly at Samantha, but their fingers never stopped twisting the cover of paper into wired stems. It seemed odd to see bright blossoms in the middle of the dark, cheerless room. "All right, children," said the woman kindly. "Gawking won't get the work done any faster, will it?" She bounced the baby in her hip while she told her story. "That Mike O'Malley," she said as if his name were a curse. "He did live here, and drinking was all he was good for, you'll pardon me saying. Then, about 2 weeks ago, the 3 girls came to live with him. Good, polite girls they were, too, and if Mike O'Malley didn't take all their money and everything else they had and run off, he left them all alone in the room upstairs. They had nothing to eat and nowhere to sleep on the bare floor. Well, the oldest one, Nellie, was as the brightest child I've ever seen. She tried to clean up the place and make it decent, but they couldn't stay there with no coal for a fire and not 2 pennies to rub together, so I took them in here." They sat down to work, and there was never a word of complaint from one of them. but we're crowded in here already, as you can see. After about a week, Nellie said they couldn't stay and be eating our food any longer. So I did the only thing I knew to do. I took him to the orphanage, where at least they'll be safe and warm and fed and get some schooling. And it didn't break my heart to see them go. They're gone? Said Samantha. To an orphanage? Yes, said the woman. Over on 20th Street. It's called the Cold Rock House for Homeless Girls. She shook her head. They've got no one left in the world to take care for them now, poor things. Though you mark my word, they're better off without that good-for-nothing uncle. Samantha couldn't believe what she had heard. Nellie and the girls were in an orphanage. Cold Rock House didn't sound very warm or welcoming, but that'd be better than living with her Uncle Mike. Thank you, Samantha said to the woman. Now I know where to find Nellie. Thank you for being so kind. It's the least I could do for those dear girls, said the woman. If you see Nellie and the little ones, give them my best love, and I still think of them, and I wish I could do more for them than myself. Samantha shook the woman's hand. I will, she said. I'll tell them. Then she turned and rushed toward the steps onto the steely gray dust. She hurried home through the shadowy streets, thinking only of Nellie and her sisters. That's the end of that chapter. See you later.